Have you ever thought that what seemed like luck almost turned into a disaster? Have you ever wished for a life-changing opportunity, only to fear losing everything once it arrived? And have you ever lost something you deeply cherished, only to realize later that it was life's way of saving you? Today's story will take you back to a peaceful countryside where a diligent farmer lived a simple life with his wife and children. Each morning, he went out to the fields before the sun had risen, plowing and hoeing. All he hoped for was enough rice to feed his family and the warmth of loving eyes waiting for him at home. Until one day, he discovered something shimmering beneath the soil behind his garden. It glowed like the first ray of sunlight in harvest season. And in that moment, the dream of a better life began to flicker in his heart. But it wasn't just a moment of joy. It was also the beginning of a series of events he could never have foreseen. Once upon a time, in a peaceful and prosperous kingdom, there lived a farmer with his wife and children in a small straw-roofed hut tucked away on the edge of the village. Each day he worked diligently in the fields, his hands covered in soil, yet his heart as calm as a still lake. His sweat watered the rice rows as if each drop washed away all his worries. He wasn't wealthy, but he possessed something many longed for: a small family, humble meals, and restful sleep after a day of honest labor. Then, one early morning, just as the sunlight began to kiss the dewdrops, he happened to walk past the back corner of his garden. And in that moment, his eyes froze. Something sparkled from beneath the soil, a tiny glint piercing through the dry earth, like a strange whisper rising from the deep ground. Curious, he knelt down, brushed the dirt aside with his calloused hands, and touched something solid and cold. He dug it up. A treasure. A brilliant object that seemed to hold the morning sun itself within a single gem. It gleamed brighter than the golden grains he had ever harvested, and in that instant his eyes gleamed just the same. His hands trembled slightly as he held it, as if afraid that releasing it would make it vanish like a dream. A thought rose in his mind, something entirely unfamiliar. Not about planting seeds, or whether there was enough rice for the day, but a dream. What if I could sell this? But he also knew, where there is light, there is also shadow. His heart began to waver between excitement and fear. And that was the very moment that opened a story he could never have imagined. Since the day he found the treasure, the farmer lived as if between two worlds. One part of him still sowed seeds, still cared for his wife and taught his children. But another part quietly grew inside him like a smoldering flame. The fire of ambition, of dreams wrapped in gold and silk. A bigger plot of land, new clothes for his wife and children, a new status in the village. But the more he longed for it, the more afraid he became. Afraid others would find out. Afraid the treasure would be stolen. Afraid it was all just a fleeting dream. So he hid it, carefully, secretly, beneath his bed, where no one would look. Days passed. The dream grew. Joy became silent. Until one afternoon, as he returned from the fields. The bed was empty. The treasure was gone. His heart dropped from his chest. His eyes scanned every corner of the house. Then he rushed outside in panic. And there, he saw his son, a small boy playing in the yard, holding a wooden stick, his face dusty and smiling innocently. The boy had no idea. He had simply found something shiny under the bed, and brought it out to play in the sandbox, like any other object he had once dug up. The father froze, frozen with fear, frozen with anger, and frozen because his heart felt like it had been squeezed tight. He growled through clenched teeth. "Where is father's treasure? What did you do with it?" The boy startled. He had never seen that look in his father's eyes before. He spoke the truth, his voice trembling. I just took it out to play. But then it fell into the sand. I looked everywhere. I couldn't find it." The father staggered. He rushed to the sand pit, digging like a madman. His hands bled. Sweat mixed with dust. His mind swirled like a storm. But the treasure was gone. In that moment, the dream collapsed. And with it, rose a fury he could no longer control. He scolded the boy, punished him, blamed him for losing what he called the family's future. But what the father didn't realize was that what the boy had lost might have been the only thing keeping their family alive. 2 days later, while the farmer was still grieving the loss of his treasure, a drumbeat echoed from the village square, a sound that rang with foreboding. People gathered. Then came the voice of the royal guard, sharp and cold like steel slicing through air. "Whoever in this village is in possession of a glittering treasure, know this, it belongs to the king, and anyone who conceals it will be executed. Not just the man, but his entire family." The farmer froze where he stood. His heart seemed to stop. His legs trembled. His eyes widened, but everything in front of him blurred. That treasure belonged to the king? If he hadn't lost it, if it were still under the bed, he didn't dare think further. His fear was no longer about losing wealth, but about losing everything. His wife, his child, the little home he had spent a lifetime building. And then, like a nightmare come to life, the soldiers began searching house by house. Their heavy footsteps pounded the earth, each one thudding like a drumbeat inside the villagers' chests. Then came the farmer's hut. The door creaked open. The soldiers stepped in, their eyes sharp as blades, their hands turning over everything. Under the bed, inside the wooden chest, behind the stove, in the straw basket. The farmer stood still, his back soaked in sweat, his face pale, his hands clenched tight as he tried to remain calm. His young son clung to his mother, eyes wide with fear as he watched their home being torn apart. Then, the soldiers left. They had found nothing. No treasure, no evidence, no death, only emptiness, and a father who collapsed to his knees, burying his face in his hands, gasping like a man who had just escaped a noose hanging above his roof. In that moment, he understood something. The treasure had not been lost. It had been taken from him to protect him. What he thought was a tragedy was actually his salvation. And in that fragile space between life and death, he began to wonder, was the glittering object he had found that day ever truly a treasure at all? That evening, as peace returned to the village, the farmer sat alone on the front porch of his home. The soft golden light of dusk stretched across the fields. A gentle breeze carried the scent of ripened rice, soothing a soul that had just weathered a storm. He looked at his son playing in the yard, those small hands that once dropped the treasure, and in doing so, had unknowingly saved the entire family from a death sentence. A treasure was lost, a nightmare was avoided, and a deeper truth began to surface. Perhaps, not every loss is truly unfortunate. Sometimes, what we lose is exactly what life takes away to protect us from something far worse. He had once believed that treasure was his ticket to a new life. But now, he could see clearly. That shining object did not lead to glory. It almost led him into an abyss. And so, in the stillness of the late afternoon, he sighed. Not out of regret, but from the quiet realization of something profound. The peace of his family, his child's laughter, and the simple gift of life continuing. These were the true treasures he had always possessed, but never noticed. From someone who thought he had lost everything, he began a new journey. A journey of seeing his life through the eyes of gratitude. Sometimes in life, we think luck is about holding on to as much as possible. But rarely do we realize that, at times, losing something is the greatest protection life can offer. The farmer once dreamed of a dazzling future. But that very dream nearly took everything from him. His wife, his children, his home, even life itself. And then, when the treasure vanished, the thing he believed was a tragedy turned out to be a blessing. We often focus on what we don't have, and forget to appreciate what we already do. A family meal, a solid roof in the middle of a storm, an embrace from someone you love. These are the quiet treasures, yet truly priceless. Happiness doesn't come from what glitters. It comes from what is simple and lasting. And sometimes the best thing life gives you is the very thing you thought you had lost. Final message to the listener. If you're feeling regret over something that didn't work out, don't be too quick to blame life. Perhaps you've just been saved from something far worse. Take a step back, look again, and ask yourself, what is the real treasure of my life? Everything that happens in life happens for a reason. When you learn to accept that, you'll realize, sometimes losing a treasure is exactly when you find yourself. If this story touched something in your heart, share it with someone who may be caught between loss and holding on. Because maybe they too need a quiet reminder. You're not alone, and something good is still waiting for you ahead. Sometimes the most precious gift isn't what we hold in our hands. It's what we're brave enough to let go of, so we can keep what truly matters.